Good to meet you guys. I'm a pretty informal speaker. I usually like to have interaction with the audience. So as I go along this very short presentation, if you've got questions, just raise your hands and speak up. I think my background is somewhat relevant to what I'm going to talk about, which Southeast Asia is basically, as I was telling Richard, like the stepchild of Asia, right? Everyone knows about Japan, everyone knows about China, India is the latest fad, but there's about 650 million people that we kind of take for granted in Southeast Asia. And if you throw in Hong Kong and Taiwan, it's still about 650 million, but it's quite a big economic region. And the interesting thing about it is the GDP per capita there, on average, is about 4,000, right? If you look at where China was when BAT, Baidu, Ali, Tencent started to crank up, it's around 4,000 GDP per capita. So that part of the world today is sort of poised to start growing very rapidly, and I see it on the ground. Right? I see it in the investments coming in. I see it in all the activities around building tech startups. Let me start this by with a commercial. C-Connect, Southeast Asia Connect, is an organization that Mangsel started. There's a whole bunch of folks involved, including alumni from all the different ASEAN countries in Stanford, as well as Berkeley, as well as professional organizations, SG founders, which is a bunch of Singapore founders in the Valley, are part of this. Kleiner Perkins just signed on to help organize more events. The idea is very simple. We're trying to create a network of Southeast Asians here and Southeast Asians back in Asia, and get that connectivity going, right? So you understand what opportunities there are, what jobs there are. If you want to move back to Southeast Asia, you've been here the last 10 years, you have no idea what's going on there. This is how you find out, right? So we have an event tomorrow, excuse me, but we do this on a regular basis. So give me an email address or your card. I'll put you on our mailing list if you're interested. Okay, so let's get into some of the slides. They'll be pretty fast. There is approximately, Google and Temasek together did a study on the market. Temasek, in case you guys don't know, is one of our two sovereign funds in Singapore. It runs, what, about 300 billion or so of the government's money. And it, together with Google, the next billion, that's the group that oversees emerging markets at Google, did a study. And basically, they think within, I think, about 5 years, it's a $200 billion digital economy in Southeast Asia alone. And I think they exclude Hong Kong and Taiwan from this. So what I'll do is very quickly run through the Southeast Asia internet economy, give you a sense of the opportunity and the startup landscape, and then some of the challenges. Numbers, very simple. These slides will be available. I'll pass them to Richard. It's 260 million users already online, right? That's less than half of Southeast Asia. About 4 million users coming on every month, right? These numbers look like approximately half of China when it was happening, which is approximately the population of Southeast Asia. Yeah, basically, people have multiple SIM cards. Right? That's why 700 million connections. It is one of the fastest, is it the fastest? Debatable. Some people think India is fast also. The fastest growing economy last year, for example, in the world, on the planet, was the Philippines, followed by India, I think. So it's one of the fastest growing market. Together, it's the CAGR is approximately that of India, right? Here's the interesting part. The GDP of Southeast Asia is actually 20% larger than India. GDP per capita is about double that of India, right? I will have a slide later that'll get you to think a little bit. What's the opportunity here? In the next 5-10 years, just in the main areas of the internet economy, Southeast Asia is expected to grow by 6.5 times. Let me dive down into one particular area which I'm invested in to give you a sense of the kind of activities we see. Insurance in Indonesia is growing approximately 20% a year. The whole country, right? The whole country. Because at 4,000 GDP per capita, people are just starting to have enough disposable to think about insurance and all that stuff, right? So it's cranking up at 20%. We've got a internet company, and internet is growing about 20-30%, right, in Indonesia. So we've got an internet company that's selling insurance and other financial products online, and their growth, their monthly growth is around 20%. Right? So it's just one of these rocket things that's taking off. And this is going to be sustained. This is not going to be like this year, next year. It's going to be sustained the next 10 years. And by the way, if you're doing a startup, if you have a small company, you really don't worry too much about, how big is the total addressable market, except for, obviously, if you want to get VC funding, you got to worry about those things. But you worry about how fast is the economy growing. In a slow-growing economy, you can't get new business that easily, right? So what's important if you want to grow companies fast is a fast-growing economy. There are systematic changes that are expected to happen that will cause the exponential growth. I think in this case, we're using e-commerce in a vaguer term. It's not just inventory-led, selling of stuff online, but transacting online. First of all, it has one of the youngest population on the planet. Southeast Asia does. 70% is under 40, I think, and it says here, China has an aging population. 40 is only 57% under 40 right now, which is, if you think about it, a bit worrisome, right, for the country. More than half of Southeast Asians are less than 30, right? Think about that. It's one of the aging population around the world is a big problem, except in Southeast Asia, ex-Singapore, basically Singapore. The rest of the countries all have very young populations growing really fast. Internet penetration is going crazy. The World Bank made an estimate that by 2020, 80% of the world's population will be covered, will be on the internet via a smartphone. Right? And we're seeing that growth in Southeast Asia. GDP growth is approximately 5-6%. Right? That it's nowhere near China's greater than 10% kind of growth the last 30 years, but still it is one of the fastest for this number of people on the planet. China now is obviously slowed down. I spent about 3+ years investing in China. The activity levels there are unlike anything I've seen, including in the Valley. I spent 18 years in the US. Right? But I'm starting to see signs of that kind of activity, a little bit of craziness even, exuberance, obviously, in the Southeast Asian market. So you can see that the activity is not just sort of theoretical in large numbers, but on the ground you can see it too. One of the challenges doing business there, actually I was very lucky going into China. My timing was such that the payment systems weren't worked out yet in China when I went there in 2010. So every deal that had to transact with a consumer, we would ask, so how does the consumer pay for this, right? So we'll ask them about payment processes and all that. In 2 years' time, by 2012 or so, we didn't ask that question anymore. All the systems were there. You could transact without any problems. Basically, you could collect money from people transacting on the internet without a lot of margins, right? Usually, by the way, telcos and banks are the ones that lose out there because they have this walled garden view of life, and they try to charge a lot, maximize profits, and the result is they lose the market, right? So the guys that run payment now in China are Ali and Tencent, right? And of course, the stores much less accessible in Southeast Asia. So this is one of these areas where Southeast Asia will avoid the build out and go straight to the new tech, which is e-commerce. There are other things like logistics. For example, over in the US, $3 out of every $100, 3% of GMV of stuff you buy is used in logistics, right? So it's very efficient if you think about it. Right? Only $3 out of every $100 you spend is used to ship stuff around. In Indonesia, that number is closer to 30%, $30. So it's really inefficient. That is going to change too. We have a deal in that space. Think about the opportunities there, right? These are multi-billion-dollar industries. Travel market is going nuts, just like in China. The biggest travel company now is Ctrip, partly because they rolled up a few others. Skyscanner belongs to them now. And the development in Southeast Asia is very similar. One of the latest unicorns in Southeast Asia is a company called Traveloka. Guess what they do? Media, we know for a fact the consumption is going through the roof. In fact, there are some Chinese companies that are acquiring local companies at this point. So, all that said, what does the startup landscape look like? So, if you look at the ratios here, right, the ratios between India to China, right, VC investment as a percentage of GDP, and then Europe, and then Southeast Asia, right? What do you see in there? Let me see if I can put it differently. These are numbers that were from, I think, 2 years ago. So in Southeast Asia, there was a total of 1.6 to 1.7 billion invested. In India, in 2015, was 7.7 billion. Right? The internet population in India, although this is not GDP, but just the internet population in India is slightly higher. But even given that, the VC investment per internet user is 0.3 of that of India and Southeast Asia, right? And then here's the kicker: the GDP per capita in the metro cities in Southeast Asia is about 3 times that of India. What does all this tell you? You guys are from Stanford, really smart guys. What does this tell you? Anyone want to try? Okay, I'm looking at it from a VC's point of view and investor's point of view, right? Look at the arbitrage possible here. Yep.
So there's a lot of money to be invested in Southeast Asia.
Yes, there's a lot more. You can get a lot better deals as an investor in Southeast Asia by a large factor, right? Compared to India, it's like almost 6x. It's about 5-6x. Right? So I was an early LP in what became Excel India, right? And I've looked at investing in India forever. There's a lot of relationships between here and Bangalore and Delhi and Mumbai. And so I've been exposed to India for quite a while too. The challenges are very, very different, but the macroeconomic numbers actually gives you a sense of the opportunities. Right? So this is why I'm not an investor in India. I'm not a VC in India. I'm a VC in Southeast Asia. Singapore is today the most active country. You know, the most number of seed deals get funded there of any region in Southeast Asia, but it's changing really, really quickly. Indonesia has about almost 100, about 80 times more citizens than Singapore. 800, sorry. Is that right? No. Indonesia has about 260 million people. Singapore has about 3.5. Right? So that's going to change. Those numbers are going to force a change very, very quickly. It's about 80 times the number of people. For whatever reason, the recent survey by, I'm going to jump ahead to, I can't find that. There's a recent survey it's called the Startup Genome Project, and they survey all the tech centers around the world and rank them. For whatever reason, Singapore is actually #1 for talent availability. So you got, I don't know how that happened, but you can take a look at the report. It's available in public domain, I think. Okay, challenges to overcome. This is the same globally. The #1 problem, talent around engineering, around marketing. You know, it's not different here. It's not different in Europe or South America or Asia, China, India, Southeast Asia. It's the same, right? So if you know how to work in the tech world, you'll be one of the last people with a job, right? Everyone will lose their jobs as we automate everything, and you will still have your job, but you will still lose it at some point. And funding capital, China way overfunded. U.S., yeah, is a little bit bubbly, not as bubbly as China. I would argue India is a bit bubbly given where it is in the GDP per capita. And so it is with Southeast Asia. It's a challenge, and that's why we formed the fund, and there are probably 3 or 4 others that started around the same time as we did. And there's more coming. One of the oops, I'm sorry, question?
So isn't Singapore the most expensive cost of living by some huge amount over any of those?
Yeah, there are some reports that do that, but they assume you own a car and a house and all that stuff. So if you take away those things, right, you can't live in the streets, but if you rent instead of buying a house, and if you take public transport, which is very doable in Singapore, then it is nowhere near the most expensive city. And, all these surveys, there are political angles to it. You know, like for example, we've got several universities that have computer science departments better than University of Illinois, which is where I come from. Right? I'm going, What? But we know how to play the game in Singapore in some surveys, and we get ourselves up positioned well. In others, we don't pay attention, and this is one we don't pay attention in, and it doesn't look good for us. But it is expensive. The cost of engineers are about a third here, which is still very affordable relative to here. But yeah, but the taxes are also, the maximum tax bracket is like 19%. So it's still very affordable. You keep most of the money you're paid. More than half the population in Singapore don't pay taxes. So another opportunity, banked individual, people without bank accounts. The problem we have is in the banking industry, we have this model that requires branches, physical tellers, all these old brick and mortar approaches. And some of these things are actually legislated into the law. So if you want to open a bank, you got to open a branch and so on and so forth. So it doesn't make any sense, and it's causing large chunks of Southeast Asia to be unbanked. Guesstimates are, I think these numbers are kind of low. About 65% of Indonesians are unbanked, for example. Some are not bankable, some are just unbanked. They have a job and all that, but it's too difficult or expensive to access banking. Huge opportunities. Ali, for example, Alibaba has set up a fund to invest in, buy out payment companies across Southeast Asia. Every country they're going to be placing a bet. So they're building a huge network there. This is Ant. Everyone should know about Ant, I guess. So huge opportunities, but rapidly getting solved. Right? Big dollars involved. So this will help increase the speed of internet adoption when this starts happening. Internet speeds, I think I have better internet speeds in Singapore than here. Right? We got fiber to the home everywhere now, just about. But that's an anomaly. Right? Most of the rest of Southeast Asia is pretty bad. I just flew in from the Philippines yesterday, and it was tough. But it's getting fixed. Very strangely, according to the World Bank again, the internet, broadband is the fastest growing utility on the planet. People want to talk more than they want water, more than they want electricity. And you can actually see anecdotal evidence of this. In some places, you see people with cell phones, and they would charge using a solar cell panel or a cranker. Right? So very odd. I was in Myanmar last year. They have a problem of underage workers. The legal age for working is, I think, 14 in Myanmar. But it's a very, very poor country. The GDP per capita is about 2/3 that of India. But there are, a lot of poor families outside of Yangon, and they send their kids very young to work in these tea houses because the parents can't afford to feed them. They start working at 8, 9 years old, very, very young. Right? And one thing I discovered that kind of surprised me, they would save their money and then send it home. The kids would do that. By the time they get to 13 or 14 years old, they would have had some savings. The first thing they buy, the first worldly possession they buy is, one of these. Right? Not this one, but they buy a cheap China phone, and they have Facebook on it. And that's their whole entertainment life, their social life is evolved around that. I was pretty amazed by how personal these things are. And if you think about it, it's very personal to you, right? So it should be personal to everybody. Logistics, we talked about logistics already. I'll just skip that. Lots of fraud, right, as you would expect in emerging markets, and therefore lots of opportunities. Yeah, this is the slide, the research I told you about. This is the software startup genome project. This is Singapore. I think we're one of the only Southeast Asian cities on this list. No, here. They finally included Shanghai and Beijing. It's about time. But yeah, I don't know where that came from or how they measure it. That's it. That's it.
Okay, this is great, Ping. We thought we would continue this with a sort of a fireside chat. So I'll do this for a little bit because I got a few follow-up questions I want to ask.
Sure.
But we'll move into kind of Q&A with everybody in the audience soon. So I got to start with something personal, though. How did your perspectives about startups change when you stopped from the entrepreneur side and you went over to the investor side? Does that really change the way you look at things?
Not that much. There's the hardest lesson I had to learn was to keep my mouth shut at a certain point, right? Because I'm used to being the CEO, the guy who makes decisions, and I was no longer. I just make the investment decision, and the rest of it, I can suggest, recommend, cajole, coax, but I cannot tell.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to learn how to do that. Some entrepreneurs can't do that, so they're not VCs.
Did it change the way that you thought about, the startup plans?
Yeah. So the advantage being a VC has is that you get to see lots and lots and lots of plans, and after a few years, you get pattern match between the people and the successes. Right. When I was at GSR was probably the best learning ground for me on that one. In the first 90 deals that we did, it took about 12 years to do those 90 deals. 12 unicorns, and 3 of the 12 unicorns were super unicorns, meaning 10 billion or more in market cap. I don't think there's another firm that has quite as accurate a set of investment results. And so I got to sit there and watch all this happening and pattern match across not just our portfolio companies, but hundreds of other companies out there.
Do you think this would make you do something different if you went back and started a company again?
Yeah, I would be a little bit better at understanding how to build companies. There are certain companies, like the last company I did, I would probably do it very, very differently. I would probably focus on the consumer as opposed to, or small businesses as opposed to an enterprise.
Okay.
Deal.
Okay.
So I understand better value creation in startups.
Okay. That's great. That's really valuable answer. Kind of moving on to the region again, you had compared the situation in Southeast Asia now to the kind of situation we saw in China a few years ago when the growth was really taking off in China.
Yeah.
A lot of the growth in China was driven by infrastructure investment until relatively recently, where you see this kind of shift over to consumer behavior driving things more. Do you think you'll see the same kind of 1-2 pattern in Southeast Asia, or will they both happen at the same time?
I'm hopeful. The problem with Southeast Asia, it's mostly democratic. So democracies are actually not very good, not very efficient for very vigorous construction of an economy. And I don't think any other country is going to be able to do it like China. because it's very top-down in China. And if you have the right people driving it, yeah, you get the growth.
Well, and not only are you dealing with different governments, which are all different democracies in Southeast Asia, but it is an awfully big area,
Yeah.
a big part of the world. There's a, you know, you are flying several hours to get from one point to another.
One of my favorite slides, I think talking to it doesn't do it much justice, but it's a big map of the world, and there's a circle around China, India, and Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
You know, it's like this big, and the map's like this big. It says more than half the population of the planet lives in this circle.
Yeah.
Right. Which is very true.
So I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about the investment situation, because yes, Singapore is definitely the center of investing across Southeast Asia, but a lot of it's cross-border.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you seeing a lot of, are investors basically requiring like a company in Indonesia to register in Singapore in order to get invested in, or how does it work?
Yeah, so what you just mentioned, companies registering in Singapore, is just a function of the not very well developed corporate laws in all the countries in Southeast Asia, right? And so the practice has been developed over time to incorporate a Singapore company and have all the in-country companies as subsidiaries of the Singapore company. And it's got to do with many things, like, for example, capital gains taxes when you sell a company. There's none when you sell a Singapore company. There's like 30, 25% when you sell Indonesian company, Vietnamese company, and so on.
So is it becoming kind of like almost an offshore kind of Cayman Island location, where there's a contract with some local entity in Indonesia, say?
So the good news for us is these setups have happened way before the tech boom, right? The traditional companies, the Indonesian conglomerates, the Thai conglomerates have been doing this all this time, when they need, especially when they need external investments. So it's a pretty standard practice, and it's actually direct ownership. It's not like the Chinese Wu-Fi structure that most of you guys should be used to.
Are you finding that you're doing more traveling around Southeast Asia than you did when you were in Beijing?
Oh yeah, Beijing.
People came to you in Beijing? Or,
well,
it was all there?
Yeah, it was all there. Beijing is DC and Silicon Valley combined. Right? Southeast Asia is scattered, so I have to travel.
Yeah, I was a little surprised that in response to the point about Singapore being really expensive, you didn't mention Silicon Valley, because you can't find many places that are much more expensive than here in the U.S.
That's correct.
But the conditions for doing the business,
value,
right. And is supported by the much larger market. So one thing that you kind of had in your slide that you didn't mention was the presence of a system for mergers and acquisitions that not so many companies in Southeast Asia are exiting by being acquired.
It's
Is that
increasing.
correct?
Not quite. Every year there's probably a dozen, 2 dozen, anywhere from 20 million to a few hundred million. One of my friends just got acquired, an Indonesian company headquartered in Singapore, got acquired by Grab. Grab just raised 1.5 billion. 650 of that they're going to use to acquire companies.
Yeah. So about exits in general, do you think that entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia have a more American attitude toward exit, or what I would call the classic Asian attitude toward exit, where the entrepreneur wants to keep a large share of stock after the company is exited?
So a lot of the investing in Southeast Asia comes from funds like ours. So our model is Union Square Ventures, GSR Ventures, Matrix. So our requirements are no different. So they're going to go public pretty soon, and it's probably in the U.S. markets. Because that's the only one on the planet that seems to understand tech.
So really, probably NASDAQ or
you will see some
IPOs.
NYSE. Within the next year or so, you're going to see some IPOs. There are companies doing like Razer is doing about $1 billion now. Garena's doing what?
So are any of these kind of like, say, WeChat in China, where arguably it's better than maybe the thing it was copying here in the U.S.?
Southeast Asia?
And may even come over to this side? Are we going to have a competitor to Uber coming out of Southeast Asia?
No, not Uber, but other things maybe.
Okay.
Like, for example, if you know the Snapchat,
Yeah.
they go regularly to China to see what's going on. A lot of innovation along the lines of broadcasting, live casting, where you reverse the camera, right? You're filming yourself.
Yeah.
That's happening in China. And one of the spin-offs, I'm on the board of the parent company called YY, is actually going to come here soon.
Okay.
So you're going to see some activities there. It's actually surprisingly an AI company above everything else.
Okay. Now, YY is already public, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but the company that does this, or it owns like a chunk of it, it's called Bigo. Mm-hmm. So Bigo is YY outside of China.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I really kind of want to come back to SEA Connect. And I don't know if people can see, but that's me in the picture on the left-hand side. I was one of the people in that panel back in December. It was a really interesting program. And one of the things that kind of hit me is how the awareness of Southeast Asia as a region has grown. I mean, it used to be, the Malaysians are competing against the Indonesians, and the Indonesians are competing against people in the Philippines, and they're competing against people in Taiwan, and you really had this sense of different competing economies. What is behind this kind of regional awareness of Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I think it's a realization, especially in the tech space, where you realize if you are going to be significant at all, you need to do multiple markets in Southeast Asia. No one Southeast Asian country, including Indonesia, is actually large enough for most of the businesses that we could build on the internet. So, by large enough, VC standards is $500 million to $1 billion exit. So if you can't get to that because of the TAM, the total addressable market, etc., then it's not VC fundable. Right? And in order to get to that scale, you have to be cross-border.
And so it's really being driven by business.
Yeah, business models. Actually, VC business models.
Yeah,
more than anything else.
No, I can see it. I remember we had a speaker in this series from Vietnam who pointed out that with 90 million people, you have to win a big market in order for it to be an interesting investment.
And most of the markets are not big
that big, yeah. Why don't we open up the floor to questions and let you ask a few things for a change. Back in the back.
Wait, so you mentioned that the kind of companies are looking for do cross-boundary within Southeast Asia, like $500 million to $1 billion. So beyond this, like payments companies and maybe like Grab, like what other types of industries you see growing within Southeast Asia to hit that $1 billion?
So the nice thing about being in my business in Southeast Asia is that we have sort of crystal balls. The Chinese crystal ball, the U.S. crystal ball, the European crystal ball. We kind of understand what's going to happen. Like, for example, our investment in C88, it's a fintech supermarket. So you can buy insurance, credit cards, loans, etc. And you educate the people about how you compare insurance policies, etc., or credit card interest rate payments, etc. Basically, financial literacy. And as a result, they buy through you, and or at least become your lead. So it starts growing, and this has happened in China. Rong 360, for example, I think it'll go public probably in a year. That's a Chinese play, similar idea. Europe, one of the founders of C88, which is our deal in Indonesia and the Philippines, one of the founders was the founder of Check24 in Germany. Right, and that's a $3 billion company now. So that's going to happen, right? Travel is another area where, for whatever reason, the global players are not usually the local winners, right? You look at Russia, you look at China, you look at India, it's all the local players that win, right? The Agoda's Priceline have significant shares, but they're usually not the winner. So Traveloka is the biggest one in Indonesia, and they're going out into Southeast Asia. I don't know, does that answer?
Yeah, I guess it answers. So your investment thesis is more like you said earlier, it's arbitrage. You just find what has been done, what has worked in other countries, and you just apply it for Southeast Asia.
Not all the time. That's the easiest, the lowest risk model. It becomes just an execution game, right? And it's much easier to evaluate execution, right? Can this team execute? As opposed to, we're not sure if this market exists, let's go try and find out, which is most of the startups here, right?
Actually, there's kind of maybe a misunderstanding that when you're talking about arbitrage, you were thinking about, the amount of investment in the internet and so forth.
That's a different.
Whereas I think that, what you're saying is that it's really market driven.
Yeah.
It's driven by, addressing the needs that people have or businesses have. Yeah. And, I think that's something that is maybe because there's so much opportunity obvious, it's kind of hard to just pick something. Yeah. Whereas here, we are actually so much more technology driven in the sense of, we're going to create new value through this new technology. Yeah. Where it's really a new solution, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And an interesting region to observe is China. Because when it started, it was, doing all this, we have the term copy to China.
Yeah.
Right? It's not really copy. The guys that just do copy to China fail, right? Like rocket copy to the rest of the world, a lot of failures.
Yeah.
Right? But copy and localize.
Yeah.
Right? And those guys created a lot of value. Chinar, C-Trip, for example, Baidu, for example. And Google helped Baidu by moving out of China, but a lot of these companies came out with those models. But the last 5 years, they've stopped being able to copy anyone.
Yeah.
So a lot of the innovation you see in China are global innovations, right? They're the first that's ever been done. The competition in China is just crazy aggressive.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and there's a lot of capital there, so they get to fight at a very, very different scale now. Good for the returns on GSR and all these guys.
Yeah. So while you're thinking of your next question, I want to follow up, okay? My follow-up question is really about the big multinational firms. And you have to include Alibaba and the Chinese multinationals there, along with Google and Facebook and eBay and the rest. Are they really active in Southeast Asia? Are they trying to do strategic investments in CVC, or what's happening?
Yeah, I think you're going to see basically the multinationals that win in Southeast Asia is basically Alibaba. Because Jack Ma looks at, he knows one of the biggest shareholders in Alibaba is actually Temasek.
Okay.
Right. So he knows the region well.
Yeah.
And he's focused on it. Nobody else is. The head of Google's next billion is Singaporean. He's based out of here and Singapore. But it's much more of a traditional sort of corporate approach, right?
Yeah.
We know Caesar well, but it's not like the CEO is saying, win this market, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure Sundar does tell Caesar that, but it's not at all costs, right? And Alibaba, they're literally pumping billions of dollars. They bought, they did $1 billion transaction a few months ago. They're going to do several multi-$100 million transactions. They just had a partnership on payments with Globe. Another one that hasn't been announced in Indonesia is going to be announced in a few days' time. So, from the activity, from the focus, from the CEO, that's just one guy that's going to basically own it.
Yeah. Okay.
You're going to see Alibaba all over the place in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
The other guy's just not that focused. Right?
It's focus or not fast enough or what?
No, this is not that focused.
Focus.
Yeah, because I know
Okay.
I know most
You
of
know
these guys.
Jack Ma. Yeah.
But I also know the other guys.
Yeah. Okay. You had a question. I saw your hand first.
I'm curious about, you mentioned about the role of the price of talent in Singapore, or the price of talent in Singapore and Southeast Asia being low, and that being sort of an attractive factor for people to move over, for companies to set up. Like, it also seems like within the region, people are pushing for increased like talent is more expensive, but you just want to pay people better.
Yeah, it keeps going up.
Yeah,
It's like
so
20-50% a year
exactly.
for
So
engineers.
do you feel like, how do you feel like that plays into the shaping of the startup ecosystem? Like, will it deter people
From starting companies?
Yeah, or I don't know. I'm just curious about the relationship between the two.
Yeah, I think it deters people from starting companies over there just like it does here, right? I mean, if you got a nice job at Google, you know, you got $250,000 as an engineer, you got $250,000 in pay, another 100, 200,000 in stocks. You know, are you going to quit that a year, right? Are you going to quit that and do a startup, right? It stops a lot of people from doing it, right? But it doesn't stop everyone, right? Same problem, different scale, but same problem in Southeast Asia.
I saw several hands, but I actually saw yours first. Okay, go ahead.
Yep, sure.
Thanks for this fascinating opening of opportunities and comparatively country by country. I'm curious about your role as being on the board of directors of Solve Education, and I came in a little bit late, so I wasn't quite clear whether you had addressed questions of education.
Not yet.
But in developing a Creative Commons MIT OpenCourseware online university that seeks to be in all 200 countries' main and official languages, we would like to build out kind of infrastructure. That's on the CC nonprofit side. We would like to also create a for-profit side that would even build out maybe around Intuit software for a variety of academic.
Your question?
So the question is, how would you focus Solve Education or your role in thinking about education in terms of the generation of engineers and talent in particularly the countries you've mentioned?
So we didn't mention Solve Education. I have right now 3 live projects. One of them is LIFE. One of them is Monks Hill, which is to create what I call ASEAN Globals, Southeast Asian Globals. The other one is Solve Education. One of the other ones is Solve Education. 263 million kids on the planet today don't go to school. So how do we solve education for them at scale, right? So I haven't mentioned this here yet. And it is a big problem. This question came out in when I was giving a talk at the African Innovation Summit like 3-4 years ago. And we realized it's a huge problem. I didn't realize the scale of the problem. So Solve Education's goal is to try and use broadband and tech. And we developed the content to be pushed out there. The difference between a Coursera user and one of our users is, first and foremost, the Coursera user is motivated to study, right? And even then, the dropout rate is like 80-90%. Our kids have no idea the value of education. So how do we keep them engaged? That's number one problem. Number two problem is the infrastructure that Coursera assumes is first world, right? You try to run this stuff in Philippines, it'll just fall flat on its face, right? So we have to assume low bandwidth, intermittent connections, low powered machines, and build solutions around that. So how do I see it roll out? We see it as an experiment. We don't know for a fact that you can educate people outside of schools, but it's 263 million kids, so we can't just say, let's forget it. If we could build schools, the problem would be solved now, right? The problem is with corruption and inefficient bureaucracies across the world, right? Even here for education, right? So how do we solve it, right? So we're going to assume something different.
Are you particularly seeking to generate engineers?
Yes, but it's a long ways off. We're just trying to figure out English.
But I'm really glad that you brought this up. This is a wonderful project, and you know, in terms of trying to change the world, that's an important thing. Thank you for mentioning it.
He asked.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
What universities in ASEAN are graduating high-quality software engineers?
Yeah. So the way, I'll get to the actual universities, but the way you think about it is actually pretty simple. If you take 650 million people and you take the top, I don't know, 0.1%, you're going to get a lot of really smart people. So the universities themselves might not be all that great. What they teach might be a little bit backdated, but it almost doesn't matter. The students that go there, to the top ones, still figure it out. It's like IIT, right? I went to school in Illinois, in grad school. Every year there'll be 2 IIT kids that come in and they'll break the curve, right? And I asked them, how come your school is that great? They say, no, the education there sucks, we're just good. Right? So it's the same. NUS is pretty good because it gives out scholarships to the ASEAN kids, right? So there's Indonesian kids in NUS, Vietnamese kids, and so on. The top couple of universities, computer science departments in Indonesia are very good. That's UI and ITB, University of Indonesia and Institute of Technology at Bandung. Those are good. The top universities in Manila and Bangkok, Vietnam. Vietnam is incredibly good. The von Neumann Institute throws out a huge number of data scientists and AI machine learning folks. There is no corner on talent, right? It's sort of, the world is fortunate in that talent is sort of distributed somewhat evenly across populations. The problem is in some populations, they don't get to come up, right? They're down farming or doing something that's irrelevant to their capabilities. This is another, by the way, one of the other reasons for solve education. If we roll this out to, let's say 10 million people, the Einsteins show up very quickly on the system. Right? So there's one way to find talent, another way to find talent.
So I also want to put a plug in. Stay tuned for other sessions in this series because this is something that's going to continue to come back. There's a lot more talent than we realize. And just a real quick personal anecdote. I went to a conference down in Manila a couple of years ago, and there were 115 startup companies that were featured in this conference. And some of them were really clever and had really, very interesting programs that have been written. I guess maybe 80% of them were software.
Yeah.
And we really don't think about software development.
Yeah.
That's one reason we talked about that last year in this series. And so this year I'm looking at biotech. I've got a speaker coming in at the end of this month.
Yeah.
I saw your hand. Yeah.
So you showed us some extraordinary numbers about the GDP per capita in India versus Southeast Asia, and the VC investment in India versus Southeast Asia.
Right.
And as you said, it's a bit of a gold mine.
Yeah.
So my question is, why? How did that come to happen?
I think the people who invested in India didn't think deep enough. I mean, not like a little bit, but 7.7 billion, right? They didn't think deep enough about what caused China to be successful and where India is at. India doesn't hit 4,000 GDP per capita until, I think, in 10 years, if they're lucky. So it'll be a while before India starts picking up at that level. But I think the investment will help accelerate that process. So I don't think necessarily we have to wait till it's 4,000 GDP per capita. In fact, some would argue the investment could actually increase the GDP per capita faster. But these are just, GDP per capita doesn't move all that fast. It's just hard to move that, especially when you have 1.3 billion people. It's really hard to move those numbers at speed, unless you get very top-down like China did. And India is the world's largest democracy, so it's not going to be that fast. I don't know if that answers the question. sort of.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So, given the amount of variation in Southeast Asian countries, how useful is it to think of it as a single cohesive market?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the way I'll talk about it is in terms of priorities as a company. You're either going to be focused on city consumers or you're going to be focused on large numbers, right, as a startup. So for the cities, then you just take the top 10 cities. There's a population of 5 to 10 million each one of them that behave like people here, people in Europe, people in China, right, in the top cities in China. So that's relatively straightforward. The laws might be different, but it's like, you know, if you build a company out here in the U.S., you end up having, you know, at least 20, 30 different tax regulations you have to follow and file because different states require different. Same thing. At least it's not 30, right? It's like 3 countries, right? And especially if you are thinking about big countries, then big populations, then the world is simpler slightly because there's only, I think, 3 countries that really matter right now, which is Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines, right? Notice I didn't include Vietnam because the GDP per capita is like India right now. But Vietnam is a great, great place for talent. It's not a very big market and not growing that fast to boot, right? So if you can hit those 3 countries, you've got almost 500 million people, right? And what happens, the reason why we're running C Connect here is actually all the Southeast Asian talent actually ends up here, a lot of them, right? And then in Stanford, Berkeley, elsewhere, and then they meet each other, they get to know each other, and we've seen teams of, you know, Indonesians, Thais, and Filipinos just go back to Singapore and they just go boom, right? So it's not that hard.
Great, thank you. Over. So you go first, okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
You touched on this briefly about demographics and the differences between Southeast Asia and East Asia, the latter of which is just older and aging faster. What kind of opportunities you see, like either economically or politically, that might open up as like there's greater interaction between the 2 societies because of, say, labor shortages in East Asia that are fulfilled by Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so we actually don't spend that much time looking at Japan and Korea simply because we're very, very occupied in Southeast Asia. The demographics in Japan is very similar to here, except for the immigration here is much, much higher, right? Which actually solves a lot of the issues that this country would have, that Japan is having. I think there are huge opportunities. You know, if you look at global investing, you focus on aging population. If you look at Southeast Asia investing, outside of Singapore, you probably don't care, right? So it's very different dynamics there. We do look at Southeast Asian companies that are focused on global problems. For example, we just did a deal with actually an alumni of Stanford. He's a PhD in AI. He sold 2 companies already. His 3rd company is a geriatric robotics company, which we just invested in. So it's a robot that helps older people live by themselves, right? And this is going to be really relevant to Japan and so on, and here at some point. Yeah.
Thanks. Charlotte?
Oh, I just saw one of your slides that you said that early stage money is like less than 7%. And I just was wondering why, you know, versus say seed, because I would say in Silicon Valley, I think the seed is harder and the early stage is more readily available.
So sorry, I lost. I don't remember what slide that was.
No, I think what you said was less than 7% of seed folks get a subsequent round, subsequent investment.
Yeah. It's for several reasons. I think one of which is that there's somewhat of a bubble in the region so to explain why a lot of seed deals don't get follow-ons, there's sort of a bubble in the region, and a lot of family offices, private money, just started investing, and they had no clue what VCs wanted to. They just look at the deal and say, it looks good, okay, here's some money, right? And then when all these companies start to talk to VCs, they realize they're running companies, typically I would say 80% of them are running companies in markets that are too small for VCs, like $100 million market. I even saw one that, I was talking to the guy, okay, this doesn't look like a very big market. How big do you think it's? Oh, it's a $50 million market. We're very excited about it. Well, you can't get a VC investment into a $50 million total addressable market. So a lot of these is because the ecosystem is young, and both the seed investors, the angels, and the entrepreneurs are just in the process of figuring it out. Right? I would say Southeast Asia, ex-Singapore, it's only the last 5 years that is cranking up. And even last year, I saw a lot of really, I'm based out of Indonesia. We've done 2 deals in the last 2 years in Indonesia. Right? There are lots of deals in Indonesia, but a lot of them are not quite investable.
Some of the Southeast Asian countries in the past, corruption was a very big problem. Has this now changed or improved? Could you comment?
So one thing I realized working in China, as I said, I spent from 2010 to, actually Richard said 2010 to 2013 in Beijing, is that actually, and this is fortunate, in tech you have to deal with it a lot less because the governments are usually way behind in regulations around tech. So long as you don't slap them in the face, you're fine. What you realize is there is a lot of corruption in China, right? But it's kind of predictable. And again, I have to qualify. I know this because I talk to other people. I don't have first-hand experience of this. Because in tech, usually it's quite okay. But what I realize is not that there's corruption or there's lack of corruption, etc. It's that it's predictable, right? The challenge with India is not that there's corruption. It's actually the corruption is unpredictable. So you just factor the corruption into the business. It's more the traditional businesses that require this, and you just deal with it, right, as part of the cost of operating a business. I'm not saying I approve of it. I'm not saying you should go do it, but I'm just explaining the difference between corruption that's predictable and economic slowing down due to unpredictability of doing, cost of doing business.
It's a great point. We may come back to that later in the quarter too. I saw another hand back in that corner. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think one of the most fascinating things about Singapore, so I've lived there for 13 years, is actually how there's actually a manufacturing sector in Singapore, and electronics contributes a big part of that. It accounts for 5% of GDP. So I was wondering if you could talk about how there are elements of Singapore being one of the most expensive cities in the world, and still for just for cost of living, but how is Singapore able to maintain an industry that generally thrives in terms of low cost when Singapore to begin with is pretty expensive, and it's grown a lot in that manufacturing sector for several years?
I think Singapore grew in the manufacturing sector in spite of the trends, because of the focus of certain parts of the government. I think Singapore wanted to keep manufacturing in Singapore. But even then, if you look at what's going on in the manufacturing in Singapore, these are very people-light businesses, lights out production lines, etc. So it's highly automated, high value add kind of production that you see that's left in Singapore. You know, most of the labor-intensive stuff is just not productive in Singapore. You just can't beat the cost of labor, you know, elsewhere. In Singapore, it's just way too high for that.
Okay. I think that's a good point for us to call an end for today. We've got some refreshments outside. We'd love to have you stand around and get to know each other and talk with Ping for a little bit. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Ping, thank you so much for a great talk.
Okay, so let's get into some of the slides. They'll be pretty fast. There is approximately, Google and Temasek together did a study on the market. Temasek, in case you guys don't know, is one of our two sovereign funds in Singapore. It runs, what, about 300 billion or so of the government's money. And it, together with Google, the next billion, that's the group that oversees emerging markets at Google, did a study. And basically, they think within, I think, about 5 years, it's a $200 billion digital economy in Southeast Asia alone. And I think they exclude Hong Kong and Taiwan from this. So what I'll do is very quickly run through the Southeast Asia internet economy, give you a sense of the opportunity and the startup landscape, and then some of the challenges. Numbers, very simple. These slides would be available. I'll pass them to Richard. It's 260 million users already online, right? That's less than half of Southeast Asia. Good to meet you guys. I'm a pretty informal speaker. I usually like to have interaction with the audience. So as I go along this very short presentation, if you've got questions, just raise your hands and speak up. I think my background is somewhat relevant to what I'm going to talk about, which Southeast Asia is basically, as I was telling Richard, like the stepchild of Asia. Right? Everyone knows about Japan, everyone knows about China, India is the latest fad, but there's about 650 million people that we kind of take for granted in Southeast Asia. And if you throw in Hong Kong and Taiwan, it's still about 650 million, but it's quite a big economic region. And the interesting thing about it is the GDP per capita there, on average, is about 4,000. Right? If you look at where China was when BAT, Baidu, Ali, Tencent started to crank up, it's around 4,000 GDP per capita. So that part of the world today is sort of about 4 million users coming on every month. Right? These numbers look like approximately half of China when it was happening, which is approximately the population of Southeast Asia. Yeah, basically, people have multiple SIM cards. Right? That's why 700 million connections. It is one of the fastest, is it the fastest? Debatable. Some people think India is fast also. The fastest growing economy last year, for example, in the world, on the planet, was the Philippines, followed by India, I think. So it's one of the fastest growing market. Together, it's the CAGR is approximately that of India. Right? Here's the interesting part. The GDP of Southeast Asia is actually 20% larger than India. GDP per capita is about double that of India. Right? I will have a slide later that'll get you to think a little bit. What's the opportunity here? In the next 5-10 years, just in the main areas of the poised to start growing, very rapidly, and I see it on the ground, right? I see it in the investments coming in. I see it in all the activities around building tech startups. Let me start this by with a commercial. C-Connect, Southeast Asia Connect, is an organization that Mangsil started. There's a whole bunch of folks involved, including alumni from all the different ASEAN countries in Stanford, as well as Berkeley, as well as professional organizations, SG founders, which is a bunch of Singapore founders in the Valley, are part of this. Kleiner Perkins just signed on to help organize more events. The idea is very simple. We're trying to create a network of Southeast Asians here and Southeast Asians back in Asia, and get that connectivity going, right? So you understand what opportunities there are, what jobs there are. If you want to move back to Southeast Asia, you've been here the last 10 years, you have no idea what's going on there. This is how you find out, right? So we have an event tomorrow, excuse me, but we do this on a regular basis. So give me an email address or your card. I'll put you on our mailing list if you're interested. The internet economy, Southeast Asia is expected to grow by 6.5 times. Let me dive down into one particular area which I'm invested in to give you a sense of the kind of activities we see. Insurance in Indonesia is growing approximately 20% a year. The whole country, right? The whole country. Because at 4,000 GDP per capita, people are just starting to have enough disposable to think about insurance and all that stuff, right? So it's cranking up at 20%. We've got a internet company, and internet is growing about 20-30%, right, in Indonesia. So we've got an internet company that's selling insurance and other financial products online, and their growth, their monthly growth is around 20%. Right? So it's just one of these rocket things that's taking off. And this is going to be sustained. This is not going to be like this year, next year. It's going to be sustained the next 10 years. And by the way, if you're doing a startup, if you have a small company, you really don't worry too much about, how big is the total addressable market, except for, obviously, if you want to get VC funding, you got to worry about those things.